Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name's Alexa and today we're going to be reviewing ACE International History, Unit 3.4. The big question for this review is why did war break out in 1939? So let's get into it. To begin, Churchill's prediction comes true. So Churchill predicted at the Munich conference that Hitler had no intentions of keeping his promises that he would remain in the confined area of Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia. Then, in March 15th, 1939, his predictions came true because the German troops invaded the rest of Czechoslovakia. Chamberlain felt Hitler's actions might be a step towards world domination. Then, the 10-year rule was the assumption that Britain would not be involved in another major war for at least 10 years, which led to cutting back in defense spending and led to Britain's military not being prepared for war and then reduced military capabilities. Now, Britain abandoned the 10-year rule in 1932 because they thought that they would not be able to defend the empire in case of war. Then they made a Defense Requirements Subcommittee, the DRC, which aimed to identify how to address the deficiencies in Britain's ability to defend itself. In 1934, the DRC reported that Britain would face a major war in 5 years, which was correct. However, they also reported that Hitler's Germany would not be an immediate threat and Japan was the biggest threat, which was obviously wrong, as we'll get to later. Now, the DRC did identify Germany as a threat, just not the major threat. So they advised spending £75 million on defense over the next 5 years. However, the Great Depression occurred, and Britain could not afford this, since money was needed for housing, health, education, and all other priorities that was seen in Britain's eyes. Public opinion was very largely anti-war, so they also didn't really want to increase their defense spending since they didn't want to go to war. Britain chose to spend £50 million, over the next 10 years. So they reduced the DRC's advised spending amount to $50 million, and instead of doing it over the next 5 years, like how the DRC recommended, they decided to do it over the next 10. Then, in 1936, Germany, Italy, and Japan were all clear threats. The DRC warned Britain that they could not win a war against these three main powers. So they suggested that Britain increase its rearmament, but also that they continued with appeasement to not trigger any wars. Then, Britain accepted these recommendations. Chamberlain believed that Germany's economic problems would force Hitler to end his aggressive foreign policies. Britain began developing its defense capabilities with the Royal Air Force, the RAF, receiving new planes like the Spitfires and Hurricanes, and the Royal Navy received new battleships and aircraft carriers. Older ships were also modernized. So by 1939, Britain was committed to building 9 battleships, 25 cruisers, 43 destroyers, and 19 submarines. This shows that little money was spent on the actual army, but they were modernizing their boats and navy. Now we have the British Expeditionary Forces. So, in response to the threat of war Hitler posed, Britain established the BEF in 1938. So this is where the BEF would be stationed in France to prevent Germany from taking French ports. The government subsidies encouraged military-owned factories to produce military equipment. Production of anti-aircraft guns increased and new radar stations were built. Now, Britain decided they actually have to start preparing for war. Britain was still hoping that the appeasement policy would work, but just in case they had to start prepping for war. So the primary purpose of the rearmament program was defense rather than preparation to fight on European soil. So they would just have it just in case someone came and wanted to start a fight, but they themselves wouldn't go out and start the fight. So on September 1st, 1939, the British Army was 897,000 men. The French Army was 5 million men, And during World War II, over 13 million men will serve in the German army. So this showed that the British army really wasn't prepared for war. So for spending from 1937 to 1938, Britain spent 350 million pounds on armaments. Germany spent 1.6 billion pounds. And this showed that Germany was expanding rapidly and they were really preparing for war. But Britain, they didn't really think that anything would happen because they were only spending such a limited amount on armaments. And the aircrafts by the end of 1938, Britain had less than 1,000 modern planes, and they weren't prepared for war. Germany, however, had 2,800 modern planes, so this shows that Germany would obviously win a war against Britain. Now, let me go into the reasons for the Nazi-Soviet pact. So the USSR was an obstacle for Hitler since it owned parts of Poland which Hitler wanted to invade. So the USSR and Germany surprisingly formed a treaty of friendship and non-aggression treaty in August of 1939. The Nazi-Soviet pact was an economic pact that they would not attack each other in case someone invades the other. The secret agreement that Germany would invade Poland without the USSR involvement made the USSR not get parts of Poland, Finland, Estonia, and Latvia. The USSR knew that Hitler may be disloyal, but the USSR was vulnerable and isolated at the time, and they needed security. Stalin claimed that he tricked Hitler, and Hitler still planned on invading USSR. It was a treaty of convenience, and Hitler defied the Munich Conference, and Polish security was under threat. Now, let's go into the invasion of Poland. So Hitler wanted to move forward with the invasion and ignored the advice that Germany could not fight Poles and Britain and France together, and they thought that British would support. German Blitzkrieg was offensive and quick victory in Poland. The Blitzkrieg is a military tactic used by Germany in World War II. Then the Nazi soldiers with Polish uniforms faked Germany invasion to justify. Polish then asked for help at 8 a.m. and British issued an ultimatum at 9:30 p.m. The ultimatum got ignored, and Britain went to war with Germany. France also declared war, and Britain required conscription since they didn't have enough people in their military. The USSR sent troops to invade eastern Poland at Polish border, and World War II began 20 years after World War I. The causes could be the Paris peace settlement issues and German resentment of Treaty of Versailles, failure of the League of Nations, and economic crises worldwide. Also, fear of communism appeasement, and Stalin agreeing to the Nazi-Soviet pact, and Germany taking Czechoslovakia and Poland were all major threats. Historians claim that Hitler always wanted to get involved in war and get USSR. Others believe that he fought to get back at his embarrassment during World War I, and another claim that he works for greater Germany. Some claim that he never wanted war at all, and that he is just an opportunist. And they especially claim that he didn't want war with France or Britain since they were also major world powers, and they didn't want to get into an argument. But obviously that was resented. So that's all for topic 3.4. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for topic 4.1.